tenemos tenemos la interpretación en la parte inferior de sus pantallas. Podrán ver un mundito o un globo. Ahí tendrán que seleccionar. Tenemos... perdón. Tenemos la interpretación, ¿sí? Y ya después de eso, ustedes apagan ponen mute el audio original y entonces ya pueden seleccionar español. También estamos a través de las redes sociales, que era lo que explicaba Nisha, y a través de las redes sociales de todos los fondos a las cuales ustedes pueden acceder y también compartir en Twitter, Facebook e Instagram. Ahorita en un momento más les compartimos nuevamente la pantalla donde pueden ver los hashtags para también compartir lo que estamos diciendo en redes sociales. Aquí. Okay. Esas son las redes sociales y los hashtags para las conversaciones del día de hoy. Ready.
Should I continue?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we just go on to our panelists, just a very quick overview for folks who are joining us on Leading from the South, LFS. As some of you may know, LFS, Leading from the South, is a unique collaboration between a bilateral institution, that is the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and 4 global South-based and led women's funds. The collaboration, which started in 2017, is led by African Women's Development Fund, FIMI, the Indigenous Women's Fund, Fondo de Mujeres del Sur, and Women's Fund Asia. Till date, LFS has supported more than 300 feminist initiatives with more than 30 million euros in grant making across Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the MENA region, Central and Latin America. During this webinar, we have the leadership of each of the funds who will reflect on their individual as well as the collective journey of LFS over the last 4 years. We also have our representation from our partner, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to reflect on the critical need to invest in feminist leadership. And I think this is a conversation which is very critical, especially given the crisis that we are facing post-COVID-19. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to welcome my wonderful panelists and invite them to introduce themselves. I would request all of you to please take a minute and introduce yourselves with your name, organization, where are you calling from and what time it is. And please do share with us one thing that has been driving you or motivating you during this very difficult time. So we're going to start with Teresa, move on to Theo, Laura, Tulika, and then Hamke. Over to you all. Teresa.
Hi, everyone. I am very happy to see you in this I want to share with you the first what is the thing that is motivating me during the pandemic is the value of life, and it drives me to continue working for the life. The inequalities that have worsened in these times hurt me and push me to continue fighting for the well-being of the women and the girls, especially and indigenous women. I am Teresa Zapeta from Guatemala, the Maya indigenous people. Now it's 8 a.m. in my country, and I send all of you good energy and good ideas and positive mind for this time. Thank you.
Theo, you're on mute.
I always forget to unmute. I'll just jump in. Thank you, Teresa. So I'm CEO SOA. I'm with the African Women's Development Fund. I'm actually in London at the moment, where it's just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's thanks to COVID, because I came away for a 3-week work trip and then our borders closed. However, they've now reopened, so I'm looking forward to going back home. The thing that's motivated me during this COVID time is really two things. One is that it's really affirmed that our feminist approach, our intersectional feminist approaches to issues that we have been struggling for so long have been proven to be absolutely spot on. The inequality that we've been fighting has been at the base of some of the worst impacts of COVID. So it motivates me that we had an agenda, we had a good agenda. And the other thing that motivates me are the wonderful people who are fighting for that agenda. The fact that feminists in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, across the world, have really been pushing forward in terms of not just protecting our communities, but devising new ways of being and new ways of thinking. And I'm always motivated by our wonderful teams. I'm a shout out to all of you people at AWDF who are listening, but also to everyone at FEMI, at Women's Fund Asia, at FMS, because together, I think we've been able to have a huge impact. And that's because we've been able to support the amazing feminists around the world who are making the change. That motivates me.
Laura?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm from Argentina, so I will speak in Spanish. So thank you for the interpreters, and now I'm switching to Spanish. Mi nombre es Laura Leonelli Morey, del Fondo de Mujeres del Sur. Y bueno, la verdad es que mi motivación en estos tiempos tan difíciles, además de compartir las palabras de Theo y las palabras de Teresa, son, bueno, todas las mujeres, las activistas que están literalmente poniéndole el cuerpo a la lucha feminista en tiempos de pandemia. Y hoy especialmente quería contarles que estoy muy motivada por una de las integrantes de nuestro consejo directivo. Ella es Carmen Beramendi, quien es una luchadora histórica en el campo de los derechos humanos desde los sangrientos y violentos tiempos de las dictaduras de Latinoamérica. Y hoy mismo, dentro de unas horas, va a ser reconocida como ciudadana ilustre en Montevideo, la capital de Uruguay, que es de donde es ella. Así que bueno, hoy tengo un poquito de motivación ahí también en parte del equipo del Fondo de Mujeres del Sur.
Hi, I'm Tulika. I work with Women's Fund Asia, and I'm connecting from Lucknow in India, which is the capital of UP, the largest state in the country. And despite living in a well, relatively small town, I still feel that I'm not as Indian as much as I'm regional and Asian. So, and I think that is what kind of motivates me. So just before I go there, it's 7:40 here as it was in Delhi at this time. In this time of COVID, I think what really motivates me is a deep-seated anger. And much as I am inspired by the way Theo and Teresa and Laura frame it, I have to say the continuing burden on women of care, unpaid work, in fact, which has now quadrupled because of the COVID crisis, the continuing discrimination in which people are able to access just basic needs is what wakes me up every single morning and sends me to my desk. That is what we are trying to append. That is what we're trying to challenge. And as a feminist resource engager is what inspires me to get out of bed and address that anger of mine. Yeah.
Okay, so hi everyone. It's a pleasure to take part in this panel. I am unmuted, right? Yes. Okay, so my name is Hanke Nivee and I work at Task Force Women's Rights and Gender Equality at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague, the Netherlands. And I recently took over coordination of Leading from the South from my colleague Marinka. So in The Hague, it's now 4:15, and it's actually quite sunny here. So what I found interesting and troublesome at the same time about the current situation in which everyone is confronted with COVID-19 is how not only governments in different countries, but also people themselves respond so differently to the pandemic, from very late responses in some countries to strict lockdowns in others, and from people staying at home voluntarily to people challenging all measures or even denying the existence of COVID-19. I think it shows how diverse we all are, but also how interconnected we are, and as well as the importance of international solidarity. We really need to work together to end this pandemic, as no one is safe until everyone is safe. So this also means taking into account the gendered impact of COVID-19, as women and girls suffer from the consequences disproportionately. It helped me put my situation, having to work from home while teaching and taking care of 3 young children, into perspective, and it motivated me even more to ensure that women and girls are really put at the center of responses. So thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. And before I put you on the spot, we are going to show a very short video, share a very short video with everyone to tell you more about and give you a bit more information about our Leading from the South program. It's a very short 2.5-minute video. This was developed by the wonderful communications teams of the 4 funds who worked across language and time zone barriers to put together the video about the vision and mission of the Leading from the South. We are extremely grateful to our partner and supporter, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for their support, as well as Power, Philanthropies Advancing Women's Human Rights, who supported all the 4 LFS funds with a critical institutional strengthening grant called the Accompaniment Initiative, right in the beginning phase when we were all dealing with issues around transitions and expansions. And for that, we would also like to give a big shout out to our sister fund, Mama Cash, who played a very critical role in this initiative, as well as our sister fund, Global Fund for Women, and Prospera, the International Network of Women Funds. We carry all our sister funds across the globe together with us on this webinar. This is for all of you, and this video is dedicated especially to all our partners. So I do hope that you appreciate our little effort. Thank you.
Women exhibit courage and leadership in the direst of circumstances, and with the right support, they are the most effective at creating change. Women's rights organizations in the Global South are confronted with labor exploitation, lack of rights, barriers to access to education, and a lack of leadership opportunities. To support the organizations that address these issues, Leading from the South was launched in 2017 as an innovative and collaborative funding initiative between 4 leading women's funds from the Global South. African Women's Development Fund, which works on promoting women's rights in Africa and the Middle East. Fondo de Mujeres del Sur, which contributes to strengthening women and LGBTIQ activism in Latin America and the Caribbean. Women's Fund Asia, which is committed to supporting women and trans rights organizations and activists across Asia. And the International Indigenous Women's Forum, which focuses on individual and collective rights of Indigenous women around the world. Together, they create a unique opportunity for women's funds to work across several continents on a core agenda. As a Southern-based consortium, LFS supports women's rights organizations that understand the context in which they operate, providing grants directly, thereby promoting a real shift in power. The money flows to organizations where women are the agents of their own stories of change. This collaboration brings an inclusive and intersectional approach to each fund's work and enables innovative ways of sharing knowledge and leveraging resources. Through the organizations they support, the 4 women's funds have already impacted the lives of thousands of women fighting inequality around the world. Continued support for women in the Global South will contribute to a more equal society for all, with socio-economic justice and sustainable development. Leading from the South, strengthening women's rights advocacy in the Global South.
Thank you. I really do hope that you liked our little effort here. And with that, I'm going to open the panel. And we're going to start with the opening statements, starting with the 4 representatives of the 4 women's funds. If you can all share very briefly, please note that each of you has approximately 3 minutes each, and I will be the strict moderator where I will have to cut you off. So, so very briefly, if you can share at least 2 to 3 key reflections from your LFS journey, from the LFS journey of your fund over the last 4 years. I'm going to invite Teresa first, followed by Theo, Laura, and then Tulika. Thank you. Teresa?
Thank you, Anisha. I will be continuing. Agradezco la oportunidad porque nos ha hecho dar una mirada del camino recorrido en estos 4 años que pasaron tan rápido, intensos, de mucho trabajo. En relación a cuáles son como esas 2 o 3 reflexiones. La primera que viene a mi mente y que coincidimos con el equipo de FIMI es que para nosotros Liderando desde el Sur, el programa, significa confianza. Confianza en las mujeres y en nuestras capacidades. Confianza en las mujeres del sur global, lo cual es muy importante. Y en nuestro caso, como FIMI y nuestro fondo AINI, Liderando desde el Sur es un acto político de confiar y de trabajar junto a las mujeres indígenas, pero también de confiar en un fondo dirigido por y para las mujeres indígenas. Creo que para nosotras esta es una de las relevancias más importantes que tiene el programa. También hablo de confianza entre nosotras, las 4 fondos. Algunas nos conocíamos un poco y otras primera vez que nos conocíamos. Sin embargo, hubo esta capacidad de creer entre nosotras. Y creo que hemos logrado botar uno de los estigmas que se dice, las mujeres no pueden trabajar juntas, claro que sí. Y esta es una muestra de ello. Para nosotros ha generado una coalición, una alianza, pero lo más relevante es una alianza incluso entre distintas culturas, distintas regiones, distintos fondos con distintas metodologías, incluso distintos idiomas. Ha sido súper interesante cómo hemos ido creciendo en ese aprendizaje de nosotras mismas, de nuestras culturas institucionales, pero también culturas como pueblos y como regiones. Pero todas con un mismo objetivo, y no me cansaré de decir porque lo he dicho en varias intervenciones. Esta diversidad tenía un enfoque que es el de transformar las desigualdades, acercar el financiamiento para transformar las desigualdades. Y quiero reconocer también en este camino la confianza de un donante que es el Ministerio de Holanda, que ha dado pasos importantes para transformar la filantropía, de trabajar con nosotras, de sentirnos parte, de poder opinar. Y me parece que es uno de los elementos de este caminar. Y el otro elemento, el crecimiento interno. Cada uno de nuestros fondos empezamos con una autoevaluación, identificamos nuestros vacíos individuales como fondos, pero también los colectivos. Y ese ha sido un valor importante para todas. Y lo más valioso también es que esa evaluación no se quedó en la gaveta de un escritorio. Lo hemos ido trabajando y hemos avanzado en el crecimiento interno de nuestros fondos, pero también el crecimiento de nuestras socias, aliadas. Creo que esto es relevante. Y por último, un elemento que me parece fundamental traer acá de este camino recorrido es la interseccionalidad. La interseccionalidad que tanto hemos venido planteando de las diversidades, pero también la interseccionalidad de las problemáticas. La interseccionalidad de las propuestas para resolverlas. Creo que es otro de lo que hemos venido trabajando juntas y me parece fundamental mencionar que hemos trabajado muchísimo en herramientas, mecanismos y para nosotras dentro de FIMI, liderando desde el sur, ha significado también potenciar nuestras otras áreas de trabajo. Nosotras tenemos una metodología integral, trabajamos junto a las mujeres desde la formación, fortalecimiento de capacidades, pero a la vez la incidencia política y el acceso a los recursos. Entonces, esta integralidad que nos viene a dar liderando desde el sur potencia nuestro trabajo. Y bueno, en las siguientes intervenciones compartiré algo también sobre esta incidencia que hemos hecho en la filantropía. Creo que vale la pena mencionarlo en mis siguientes intervenciones. Me quedo por acá en esta primera ronda.
Thank you, Teresa. Theo?
Okay, so trying to be brief because really I could talk to you for 2 hours about what we've learned from leading from the South, but just a few of the highlights have been, number one, let me put out the big elephant in the room, the money. Having that amount of money to support women's rights organizations across our different geographies has been fantastic. We've been so used to working on the margins and with very, very little in the way of funding that having this money has been fantastic because money is power. And part of LFS has been getting that money to the people who are doing the work and making the change, but making sure that that money is going and being interpreted almost by other global Southern feminists. That's one of the second reflections, that there is such a powerful statement that has been made about the strength, the power, the capacity, and the skills of feminists from the global South. Very often people have wanted to talk about women's funds, and particularly women's funds from the global South, as being small, being slightly marginal. You can play around at the end, but don't give them too much money. And I think leading from the South has shown really clearly that we have all the skills, all the competencies, everything, the political framing, as well as the political linkages within our movements that enable money to be used more effectively. I think there's a big statement that the world needed to hear about not marginalizing women's funds from the global South, about recognizing our power and agency. We knew that already, but very often people choose to ignore that. And I think Leading from the South has been amazing from that. And even from the very name, Leading from the South, the statement was made and the statement continues to be followed. And so the last two things I'll say is I'm really proud of the way in which we've been able to influence the resourcing agenda across the world. That people are now looking and saying, actually, women's funds, it's not just us. We have a network and a community of women's funds, all of whom work on resourcing advocacy. But I think that Leading from the South has been able to be held up and profiled as a model that works and that shows how working together can mean that we are more than the sum of our parts, but also says to people, listen to what women are saying and doing in the global South. So it's absolutely all of our other women's funds community who have been part of this effort, but I think that Leading from the South has made that really clear message and changed the discourse. It's made people have to speak about women's funds differently. And then just the final thing, again, how great it is to work with people who have the same value systems and principles as you do. Working with the other three funds has been great. At AWDF, we have learned so much from our sisters, and I hope that they have also learned from us, but it's meant that we have been able together to make changes, not just in our regions, but across our regions. So sisterhood is powerful, and I've loved having that.
Thank you, Theo. Laura, and then we have Tulika, and I'm going to request our other two panelists to please stick to your time. Thank you.
Es tan difícil hablar después de Theo, que es tan maravillosa hablando. Bueno, acuerdo con Teresa y con Theo, el gran crecimiento que significó para todos nuestros fondos, especialmente por lo menos para el Fondo de Mujeres del Sur, que significó Liderando desde el Sur. Y a mí me despierta la reflexión de que algo que ya conocimos y aprendimos en los feminismos es que nada se logra solo, ¿no? Que las luchas son colectivas. Y muchas veces nosotros hemos puesto, digamos, esa idea desde los fondos de mujeres, lo miramos como hacia las organizaciones que apoyamos, pero también creo que Liderando desde el Sur es una muestra muy cabal y muy honesta de cómo las luchas o las construcciones son colectivas, porque Liderando desde el Sur y todos los resultados, grandes resultados que está logrando, ha sido posible por todas las organizaciones y las redes que hemos apoyado, que son las que están implementando los proyectos y articulando acciones, pero también por el apoyo del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de Holanda, por el apoyo de Próspera, que es la red que nos une a todos los fondos de mujeres globalmente, por el apoyo de Mama Cash. Bueno, Anisha hizo una mención al comienzo, y creo que tenemos que reflexionar sobre eso y seguir como pensando en acciones y en iniciativas que tengan una participación colectiva de los fondos de mujeres. Y también, para no ser repetitivo, pero sí me parece que es importante resaltarlo, es que creo que la apuesta del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de los Países Bajos de financiar directamente a los fondos del Sur Global, que somos parte de los movimientos de mujeres y feministas de nuestras regiones, ha demostrado que ha sido muy positiva, y que nosotras como fondos de mujeres contamos con las capacidades, la experiencia y los conocimientos para gestionar este tipo de financiamiento, y que además ahora cada vez más estamos más fortalecidas en ese sentido. Bueno, no quiero ser mucho más larga, después sigo con otras ideas.
Thank you, Laura. And finally, over to you, Tulika.
So should I go, or do you want me not to speak at this time, Ani? So just looking back, three main things. For one, I stand on what Theo said, busting the myth of whether women women's organizations or organizations led by women can absorb money or not. I mean, to be given pittance and then be expected to do some magic with it, this is the first time we're able to breathe about not only the resources and the surety of getting the resources, but receiving it in a way that we can actually make a dent on the challenges that face us. So the whole piece around actually turning that thing around, whether women can handle money, but whether women, how much money do we need to be put throughout in a consistent and sustained way. So that piece, I think that's the one highlight that I feel LFS is really established. And the second thing which I'm extremely, I feel this has enabled us to develop clarity upon is that the Women's Fund community is political. We're not here to be nice to donors. We are here to claim resources because the resources being given so far were given on the basis of inequality and had discrimination in them, and we are upending that. So be very clear that the Women's Fund community is not a nice girls community. They're not playing nice. They're here to claim what is theirs by right on behalf of the movements of of those that have been discriminated and face inequality on grounds of their sex and gender. I think the third piece, which I feel has really been critical, and that is the chase for the indicators. We all chase indicators, but LFS establishes that process was critical 25 years ago, and in the 25 years that we lost, and it is critical today, that we are actually able to invest in process that will take us to the results we want, and not just chase how many thousand women have been reached in whatever way. We've kind of built it brought back the feminist process center stage. And I'm really, I feel that is something that I'm so proud of all of us, that we as a global South, I mean, it's not even a global South. I think the global solidarity, because so many have worked with us in LFS, not just global South, but the South-South leaning on each other has really helped us in doing that. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Tulika. And over to Hanke now. And Hanke, we are going to be very nice to you. Just for you, if you can share with us, looking back, when you look back at this particular partnership between MFA and the 4 funds, what are your 2 to 3 key reflections and takeaways?
Thanks, Anisha. Thanks. It's already so inspiring to listen to these women leaders. So indeed, Leading from the South is a unique partnership. It's part of the Dutch Ministry's policy on women's rights and gender equality, and it sits within the dialogue and dissent policy framework. We are now in the 4th and final year of the program, and positive results and lessons learned indeed become visible. An important takeaway is that the Southern-based women's funds and organizations, they have shown real leadership in practice and proven their ability to manage bigger programs and effectively communicate results, amongst others, as has already been mentioned by my fellow panelists. The women's funds also played a vital role in strengthening Southern-based women's rights organizations and movements by advocating to the donor community that direct relationships and collaboration with Southern consortia are possible and beneficial. So this way, Leading from the South has contributed to a shift in more direct financing towards women's rights organizations in the Global South. Also, the past years have shown that working as a consortium, as has already been mentioned, enabled the strengthening and reinforcement of the 4 women's funds themselves. They actively seek each other's expertise, strategize, they learn from each other on program development, monitoring and evaluation, communication, as well as on expanding as an organization in both in volume and geographically. And in addition to financing, the program also has an important linking and learning component, which contributes to the sustainability of the program. LFS brings grantees together to learn from each other and to work together to link the local, national, and international level in order to contribute to implementation of SDG 5. We, the ministry, see ourselves as partners in the sense that we aim to work in a complementary way to support beneficiaries of the fund. And while our official role is that of a mere donor, this partnership between the consortium and the minister is more than a grantor-grantee relationship. We collaborate to achieve shared goals. And the assumption is that cooperation leads to results that individual partners could not achieve separately. So the ministry's role in the partnership relates not only to finance, but can also add value to, for example, facilitating or attending meetings, advising, ensuring access to international networks, etc. So finally, being a partner also means we have to sometimes step back and be reflective about our position in this program and collaboration. For example, when we want to reach out to grantees of LFS, we always do this via one of the 4 women's funds. They are in the leads. This is a Southern-led program, not a Dutch-led program. So we had to learn as well when to step forward and when to step back in managing and setting up this fund. So it has been a learning process for us as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Hanke. And I know that we're running a bit behind, so I am going to condense my next 2 questions to the panelists. So my question would be in 2 parts. The first part is if you can share how has LFS, what role has LFS played in contributing to feminist movement building work in your own regions? And my next question, which is very critical, and I think something that all of us have been speaking about, is it enough? And what do we need to do more? And for this, these 2 questions are directed at the 4 women's funds. So we're going to start with you, Tulika, and move on to Teresa, Theo, and then Laura. I would like to remind that the panelists have 3 minutes for both of these questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's easy. Piece of cake. Is it enough? I'll begin with that. Absolutely not. Clearly, we have to understand, well, the context being LFS is not the only stream of funding. LF itself needs to grow and much more needs to happen around us. So clearly we have to be, is this enough to fund feminist movement building and movement strengthening and claiming of rights everywhere in the global South? Not even close. We need much more resources. We need much more critical ways to build alliances across implementers and funders and to come on to the same page before we push this through. So let's get that very clear. Then I'll go to the first question that Anisha asked, that what has been the contribution to the feminist movement of LFS? And I think the biggest contribution has been that we have moved out of project funding. LFS takes us out of project funding and allows us to do actually feminist processes and puts feminist approaches center stage. And it incontrovertibly establishes the logic in which we see movement of implementers as well as feminists standing up for resources in a same frame without being part of the same continuum. And that's a complicated piece that I feel I'm speaking to. But in this time, I'm hoping that kind of Theo and Laura and Teresa will kind of help explain and expand upon that. I think the other point that I would also like to make is not only the piece that LFS enables us to engage with building of the feminist resource architecture in the world much more strongly. And I can give the example of Asia and the Pacific, where we are seeing very clearly how the national funds are now coming up far more strongly in terms of how they deal with indigenous donors, but also linking to bilateral aid. Because there was this whole idea that women's funds will somehow tap into indigenous money. leaving aid, being or the international aid being part of the larger international organizations. And I think as women's funds, LFS has helped us to challenge that and demonstrate that women's funds are able to do that, to seek international aid and deal with it in a very responsible, critical, and political manner, and get the resources out where they need to land for the movement. So that thing that in building the feminist movements and doing away with the roadblocks is what I feel LFS has contributed, and I'm so very happy to have been part of. Is that 3 minutes? I have not overshot, right?
You're good. Thank you, Tulika. Teresa?
Thank you. Ok, voy a tratar de usar mis 3 minutos para una pregunta tan profunda. El papel que hemos jugado desde el programa. Quiero partir por recuperar lo que Tulika nos decía. No somos el único mecanismo, o sea, esta alianza no es la única que está tratando de contribuir y de acompañar los procesos de crecimiento, de construcción de movimientos. Sin embargo, desde nuestra experiencia de esta alianza, quiero traer acá un elemento importante, el acceso a los recursos. Este creo que ha sido uno de los valores que tiene liderando desde el sur. Acercar los recursos a los movimientos, el movimiento feminista y el movimiento de mujeres indígenas. Y en nuestro caso también tratar de no solo de poder mover recursos y acercarlo también a las hermanas, las organizaciones que están en lo local, en lo nacional, sino también transformar la forma de administrar, de ver y esta relación de poder que tanto hemos planteado cuando hablamos de recursos. Porque se ha venido desde una mentalidad de las distintas épocas del colonialismo, de yo soy la que necesito y extiendo la mano y la otra persona o la otra entidad es la buena gente que quiere hacer un acto de solidaridad y poner algo de recursos. Desde nuestro enfoque de liderando y en especial del Fondo de Mujeres Indígenas, AINI, no solo se trata de recursos, se trata de transformar relaciones de poder. Es un largo camino, pero nosotras partimos desde la coinversión, de que todas nuestras socias, o lo que muchas llaman beneficiarias, tienen mucho que aportar. Tienen capacidades, experiencia, conocimientos, organización, tienen sedes comunitarias, tienen traducciones en sus idiomas propios, o sea, hay cantidad de recursos en las comunidades y en las organizaciones. Y lo que viene a hacer, liderando el Fondo de Mujeres Indígenas y nuestros otros fondos, es venir a contribuir y hacer un proceso de coinversión, de acompañamiento hacia un solo objetivo. Y el otro elemento, para responder también a la pregunta que si esto es suficiente, no es suficiente. Hemos con este mecanismo fortalecido el trabajo en red. En el caso de FIMI, que somos el fondo que tiene una presencia global en esta alianza, en las 3 regiones, África, Asia y América Latina, ha sido para nosotros fundamental tender puentes y construir un movimiento más sólido, más fuerte de mujeres indígenas. Sin embargo, estamos empezando, el camino es largo y ahora lo que toca es seguir trabajando hacia transformar las desigualdades, porque lo único que estamos haciendo en este momento es fortalecernos, articularnos, empezar a mover, pero falta la esencia, que es la transformación de las desigualdades. Ese es el camino pendiente que tenemos y por eso aún no es suficiente lo que estamos haciendo, tenemos mucho que hacer.
Thank you, Teresa. Over to you, Theo.
Anisha, I'll make your life slightly more simple. To the 2 questions. Number 1, I actually think it's down to the movements in our geographies to tell us whether or not we've been able to really contribute appropriately to the work that they're doing. I do think that what we've been able to do is contribute through funding, and through funding that is more flexible and more thoughtful and more political with a small p than much of the funding has been. And I think we've been able to contribute through accompaniment rather than imposition, because so often we all know that funding can become something that is about imposing a viewpoint and a way of being rather than supporting what is already there. And in my view, the people who make change happen, the people who form our movements, they are the key actors. And what we have to do is learn to listen as well as we can, and then to be bridges, so that we can build bridges that enable activism to happen as effectively, as flexibly, and as strongly as possible. I hope we've been able to begin doing that, but I couldn't guarantee that we have, that we've gone far enough with it. And that's my same approach to the question about, is it enough? It's not enough yet. As the 4 women's funds, we need to continue to grow. We need to continue to learn how to listen better to our movements and our activists. We need to learn how to be better bridges between resourcing and activism. So we have to do better as well, but we also have to keep pushing for the world to do better. And I agree with Tulika, one of the things I'm proudest of is our being able to help change the discourse around funding of activism. But it is not enough. If you look at the money that is held by private philanthropy, public philanthropy, bilateral and multilateral agencies, and you look at the rhetoric around the world about supporting women and the way in which women are crucial to change in all of our societies across the globe, and then you look at the percentage of money that goes from those philanthropies and the bilaterals and the multilaterals into directly supporting the activism that we know is there and know makes the change, then no, what we are doing is not enough. We need, and I've said this before, we need another 20 leading from the Souths. We need another 100 equality funds. We need power to be not just what they are, and I really appreciate what they are, but to be expanded by 100-fold. That's it.
Thank you, Theo. And I couldn't agree more. So a big shout out to that. And now to Laura.
Bueno, qué difícil resumir en 3 minutos tantas cosas. Como la pregunta tiene que ver con la contribución al movimiento en nuestras regiones, yo quería poner un poquito de contexto en Latinoamérica y el Caribe, porque se trata de una región que es la más desigual del planeta, es la más no la más pobre, pero la más desigual del planeta, y que a la vez tiene uno de los movimientos feministas más potentes y más activos y más diversos del planeta. Ahora, ¿qué pasa? Que no tiene suficiente financiamiento, y Liderando desde el Sur ha contribuido a financiar este potentísimo movimiento. Ha contribuido, estoy de acuerdo con la palabra que usa Tulika, Theo, que es una cuestión de contribución, y estoy de acuerdo también con Tulika y Theo que no es suficiente, que necesitamos mucho más. En Latinoamérica, a ver, no sé si han oído hablar del movimiento Ni Una Menos contra los femicidios, de la Marea Verde en la lucha contra el aborto, de la valiente labor de las defensoras ambientales en los territorios, que son de todas y de todas, la escenificación del Violador Eres Tú, de las artistas chilenas que convirtieron una canción en himno mundial. Bueno, todo eso es parte de los feminismos latinoamericanos. Pero aún así no tienen financiamiento suficiente para seguir potenciándolo y para seguir impulsándolo. Entonces, en ese contexto creo que Liderando desde el Sur, si bien, como han señalado, no es en lo absoluto suficiente, sí ha sido clave para contribuir, no solo a que las organizaciones implementen proyectos, como decía Tulika, sino también para articular esas voces, articular esas organizaciones. Y Liderando del Sur, creo que los 4 fondos hemos tenido muy claro esta necesidad de articular dentro del movimiento, entre los diferentes movimientos y también entre los diferentes países. Estamos también en un contexto de graves y de grandes surgimientos de fundamentalismo y movimientos antiderechos. Ustedes conocen todos a Bolsonaro, el presidente de Brasil, que es una muestra de los muchos bolsonaritos que tenemos en nuestro continente, en nuestra región. Y también Liderando desde el Sur ha sido clave en el financiamiento y en la articulación de las organizaciones que están haciéndole frente a estos movimientos. Esto creo que por un lado de la contribución a los movimientos y a tu segunda pregunta, Anilla, pero no quería dejar de mencionar que al menos en América Latina, lo que sí, luego de 4 años de estar pensando y de reflexiones internas hacia dentro del Fondo de Mujeres del Sur y también con nuestras colegas de los fondos de mujeres de la región, es la necesidad en América Latina y el Caribe de tener un modelo colaborativo de implementación de Liderando desde el Sur, que además generaría sinergias con otros tipos de apoyos y programas que estamos implementando de manera conjunta. Yo creo que de esa manera va a ser posible potenciar el apoyo y la contribución a los movimientos de mujeres feministas, LGBTIQ+, de la región. Y bueno, sí.
Sorry, the time is up. Can you
Okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. Simplemente decir que como una muestra de este potente movimiento y de la falta de recursos que hay, es que nosotros en nuestra primera convocatoria que hicimos a propuestas, recibimos 1.080 propuestas y solo pudimos financiar a 34. Creo que eso es un poco en números a lo que se están refiriendo Tulika y Teo.
Thank you, Laura. And now over to you, Hanke. I think the same question, but I think more focus on, given the ministry's history of supporting feminist interventions and programs such as Gaga, Count Me In, Voice, apart from Leading from the South, do you think it's still enough? And especially now that we are looking at a very different kind of world post-March with the whole COVID crisis. What is it that we need to do more? What is it that the community of funders need to do more?
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, first of all, on the added value of Leading from the South to the work of the ministry, it complements other programs that we support, indeed, because it supports women's rights organizations through the funds in the Global South directly, including small grassroots organizations. LFS partners have a much greater understanding and knowledge of the local context of people's demands and needs, and specifically of women's realities. Furthermore, having organizations in the South take the lead in creating change makes change more sustainable. And this is where Leading from the South has much added value. The program, as already mentioned by my fellow panelists, has also helped change the ways that donors finance civil society organizations, as well as in the roles that organizations play in the North and South. We see that Leading from the South has allowed for effective public diplomacy on the importance of funding women's rights movements and organizations. And the women's funds have, for example, inspired other colleagues within my own ministry, but other donors as well, such as Canada and DFID, to ensure more leadership of organizations in the Global South and support them directly. Also, the experience of leading from the South has helped define our approach towards strengthening civil society, such as a stronger focus on lobby and advocacy, gender equality and inclusion, more ownership of local organizations. And is it enough? And what can we do more? As I can only agree that even though we see that the work of women's rights organization in many cases has led to legislation being amended, political and civil society and businesses becoming more gender sensitive, and women and girls being more aware of their rights. No, more can be done, of course. As leading from the South has shown, it's really possible and of added value to directly fund women's funds and women's rights organizations in the global South. And there is a reason that The Guardian wrote an article last year on the fact that only 1% of gender equality funding is going to women's organizations. This article clearly argues as well that donors need to engage feminist movements as equal partners, work to transform their own institutions, and campaign to build, and these are not my own words, to build an interdependent and coherent feminist funding ecosystem that unlocks resources for human rights and gender justice. And we see that Leading from the South brings this into practice. What we also could do better simply is to invite women's rights organizations leaders to participate in dialogue on international cooperation and latest challenges such as COVID-19 and climate crisis, digitalization and security challenges, and contribute to policymaking in that way. And just one comment on COVID-19, I would only like to add that COVID-19 can be seen just as much as a systemic crisis than as a health crisis. Those groups that are already marginalized, excluded or discriminated in society are hit hardest during COVID-19, and this includes many women and girls. So it's crucial that investments on the consequences of COVID-19 are not only focused on health aids, but on long-term transformational change in societies and on gender equality and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Hanke, and thank you to our panelists for a very, very rich discussion. I would like to now open up the floor for Q&A, and I would request our participants, if you can please type in your question in the Q&A chat box, and we will then address, take a group of questions and direct them at our panelists. I'm going to wait for a minute, give people a minute, and then I'm going to start addressing the questions.
Some of the questions are coming in the chat and not the Q&A.
I'm just also seeing that. So I'm going to just take a minute to kind of club the questions together. So I'm going to start with a few questions that are coming up. I'm going to start with this one particular question. I think any of the panelists can take this up. This is coming from our participant from India, Bhanumati. She would like to ask how COVID impacts understanding of women's rights, and does COVID affect the policy level decisions and funding flows to women's rights? And the context that is coming is given that there is shrinking civil society spaces, and the marginalized community, especially like the indigenous communities, are now facing the brunt of a lot of regressive policy making decisions that are taking place. So how does that impact the funding flows, and especially at the larger policy level on women's rights? Anyone who would like to take this question?
I mean, I agree with the remark, but could you clarify the question, Anisha?
Question is, how does how COVID impacts the understanding of women's rights, and does COVID affect policy level decisions and funding level flows to women's rights? And I think this is coming from the context of the fact that there are new ways of understanding or new ways of looking at discrimination and marginalization post-COVID. So how does that impact the funding flows to women's rights?
Well, I have to say that immediately, and this is not only LFS, I think immediately speaking for the women's funds communities and many of the other donors as well, the COVID crisis was immediately seized upon, and we immediately started kind of developing processes and ways in which we could respond to the crisis, which we could respond to the needs of the individual organizations as well. At the same time, the pandemic is far larger than all of us. And I think it's a process in making, and it's a response in making. We are figuring out what is called the so-called new normal, or we are figuring out what it is now and what it will be in the next 2 years. What will we need to do? So there has been some serious changes in the way we view our grant making. We have made significant programmatic changes, significant strategic changes, and realigning our grant making around that. I think we've taken that pretty seriously. And I mean, we are very committed to making sure that we don't leave our communities in any kind of danger or risk, which we are not willing to undertake ourselves. So we have tried to be in solidarity, but I can't say that we are absolutely there, because obviously we don't have all the answers. We're figuring it out as we walk along, but we're certainly walking that path. That commitment and that journey is definitely shared.
Thank you, Tulika. So I will now quickly also read out two next questions, and please, again, it's up to the panelists. These are larger, broader questions. Anyone can address them. One is, in the light of movements such as Black Lives Matter, the aid sector has reflected on how it tackles racism. How do you see LFS addressing the intersections of racial and gendered equalities? And the second question is, how do you think we can encourage more donors to make investments similar to this? What is needed, more political will or evidence?
So Anisha, can I jump in on the intersectionality question?
Yes, please, Theo.
Okay, so we have obviously, I think, like the rest of the world, been watching what has been happening in different parts of the globe and the impact of the heightened activity around Black Lives Matter and the agendas around anti-Blackness and discrimination. The truth of the matter is, at AWDF, we call ourselves a feminist fund, and we are African feminists. As African feminists, we have never distinguished or separated out racial discrimination, gender discrimination, discrimination against lesbian and gay people, discrimination on the basis of ability, etc. Because for us, intersectionality is core to our feminism. I can't be Black and then somehow it means I'm not a woman and dealing with gender discrimination, or be a woman and somehow not dealing with the racial issues. So for us, intersectionality is core. The problem for me is that I think that we speak, or the world in general does a lot more speaking than doing. So we still have a lot to learn about being truly intersectional. And at AWDF, watching what is happening across the world, I think has helped us look not so much as issues of gender and racial discrimination and how that plays out, because as I said, that's part of our core, but it's also made us look at what are the power dynamics that we are a part of that are a part of this greater discussion about inequality and how that plays out. How are we showing up in discussions and agendas around lesbian, trans, gender non-conforming, disability rights, all of the parts of our intersectionality? I think we need to do more of it. And if I can just quickly jump on the two other questions. You know, people say, what does it take for people to invest more? Is it political will? Is it proof? Is it evidence? You know, it's not evidence, because there has been so much evidence over the years that women make change, that women lead change, that women, if you look at whether it's the Ebola crises or you look at political crises and conflict resolution, women make the difference. So there is no excuse for the limited amount of money that people choose to invest in women's rights and that kind of activism. So it may be political will. And I think that it's down to all of us to keep fighting, to keep pushing, because people are not going to change habits of many generations simply because we have the words. We have the evidence. People aren't listening to the evidence. That's not to say we shouldn't continue gathering it. We should, but I think we need to accept that it's going to take much more than that. And it's at times like this that there's an opportunity to really push the fact that feminist agendas have covered all of the issues that people are now looking at in relation to COVID. So we need to make very, very sure that funders, whether they are bilaterals, multilaterals, or private philanthropy, but also as individual women, we need to make sure that funders fund the full feminist agenda. If people decide that they're only going to fund in response to COVID, we're going to find ourselves right back where we were, because this is not a health emergency. Hanke pointed it out. She called it a systemic emergency. But I actually think it's even beyond that. It's an emergency of inequality. And therefore, the way in which we invest has to be about tackling that and not saying that we are only going to focus on COVID. We have to make sure we continue to fund core feminist agendas.
Thank you, Theo, for that. And I think Teresa wanted to also respond to this question. Teresa, there is also a very specific question, directed towards you and Femi, if you can also respond to that. And one is that, Femi has done such amazing work in the last 4 years. So what do we need to do more to reach more Indigenous women and to strengthen their networks and rights? So after LFS 4 years, what next? So if you can also quickly respond to that question. Thank you.
Sí, claro. Me gustaría responder directamente esta pregunta y comentar los otros aspectos. ¿Qué sigue? ¿Qué necesitamos? Lo que decíamos, y lo decía Laura, ponía el ejemplo, cuando abrimos las convocatorias recibimos cantidad de propuestas de organizaciones. Esto nos muestra una gran necesidad que hay de recursos que financien los procesos de los movimientos. Hay una gran necesidad. Entonces, ¿qué sigue? Necesitamos seguir tocando y transformando estas relaciones de poder para lograr ese derecho a la oportunidad de recursos para todas. Y recursos no solo económicos, sino también recursos técnicos, recursos humanos, etcétera. Seguimos trabajando en eso. falta muchísimo en transformar las políticas públicas y los presupuestos públicos. Esto creo que es una tarea que seguiremos haciendo en FIMI, acompañando al movimiento de mujeres indígenas para su articulación, su alianza, su fortalecimiento, su incidencia, para poder realmente llegar a transformar estas políticas y alcanzar esos objetivos de desarrollo. Quiero comentar muy brevemente en relación a lo que pasa en terreno y que se agrava ahora en la pandemia, la violencia. La violencia ha incrementado enormemente contra las mujeres, las niñas, en todos los sentidos y distintos tipos de violencia. Estamos teniendo casos de militarización que está afectando gravemente la vida de las comunidades y las personas. Por ejemplo, Brasil, Colombia, Filipinas, que esto ha agravado. Entonces, la COVID lo que viene es a mostrar realmente este racismo estructural, que hoy también acá estamos hablando del racismo y que lo dijo Teo, la interseccionalidad del racismo. Ese racismo está atravesando toda la vida de nuestros países. Está en lo estructural, está en los estados. ¿Por qué no tenemos políticas de salud? ¿Por qué no tenemos oportunidades económicas para las mujeres? Justamente por ese racismo. Pero también el racismo cotidiano, y ahí nos tenemos que autoevaluar, porque el racismo no está allá afuera, está muchas veces entre nosotras mismas, porque ha sido institucionalizado por muchos años. Entonces, ahí tenemos muchísimo trabajo para seguir transformando estas políticas y los presupuestos. Me parece que ahí quedó demostrado que hay una deuda y que tenemos que hacer una apuesta para trabajar en todos los niveles, desde lo más local, lo nacional, lo regional y lo internacional. Solamente eso quería opinar. Gracias, Anisha.
Anisha, do we have time for me to add to the racism question?
Sure, Tulika, if you can just take a minute.
Just to add that I really appreciated the way in which Theo framed it as a discrimination and inequality and power dynamic issue, rather than merely being based on color, because that, of course, is a very huge part of what we understand, but also to understand that racism is experienced very differently across the world. And we also need to stand where other racial discriminations live to see the bigger picture and to challenge and to actually bring about equality and non-discrimination. So because only piecemeal addressing will not support that, regardless of who we identify as being the primary target. And of course, yeah, that's where it's want to stop.
Thank you, Tulika. I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions more. So, and I know a lot of the questions are coming in, so I do apologize if I miss out any of the questions. So another question is that under the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns have really restricted women's capacities to make their voice heard. Other panelists also pointed out about increase in violence and harassment. So how can women's funds respond to this changing ways of the new normal that has come up? Example, right now we're transitioning to use of digital tools, which grassroots women are not familiar with or have no access to. So coming to questions around inclusion and exclusion and discrimination and marginalization, it's taken a completely new and different form. So how will the women's funds look at their role in this current climate? And again, this is a question addressed to the four women's funds representatives.
Anisha, ¿puedo empezar?
Laura, please go ahead.
Okay. Yo creo que si bien para los fondos de mujeres ha sido un impacto muy fuerte, así como ha sido un impacto muy fuerte para todo el mundo, creo que hemos jugado con algunas ventajas, y esto es que estamos acostumbradas y hemos peleado durante muchos años por bajar recursos flexibles en las organizaciones, que las organizaciones tengan acceso a recursos flexibles. Por supuesto que esto depende siempre también del donante. Y hay donantes que son más flexibles, tienen mayor flexibilidad con los recursos, y otros donantes que tienen menos. Pero estos años de estar peleando por esta cuestión y además de trabajar de esta manera ha hecho que las organizaciones y las redes que estamos apoyando hayan podido reaccionar rápidamente y contar con recursos para hacer frente a la pandemia, que por supuesto no son suficientes, pero no le hemos exigido que sigan un libreto de un tiempo y de un momento de la vida totalmente distinto como era el mundo pre-pandemia. En este sentido, creo que también, una vez más, así como que tenemos que seguir haciendo incidencia entre donantes para que bajen más recursos a organizaciones de mujeres, también tenemos que seguir haciendo incidencia para que esos recursos sean lo más flexibles posibles y que sean las propias organizaciones, que son las que están en terrenos y que son las que conocen las necesidades porque las atraviesan en su propio cuerpo, son las que mejores conocen, digamos, cómo accionar, cómo hacer incidencia, sean ellas las que sigan decidiendo con recursos flexibles cuáles son las prioridades.
Can I jump on to Laura's response? And kind of, one is of course that I think the women's funds are responding very critically. But I also think we need to understand that the role of women's funds is not the role of implementers. There is a difference. Our job is to bring the resources to the table. We're not foundations. There isn't money in our accounts sitting to be given away. Our job is to be political activists in claiming the resources and bringing them to the table. And that's what we are engaged in, even during this COVID time, to get the money out, to get the money in and then get the money out. So our job is not, and this is speaking as WFA only, I don't feel that we can, or I can, or a WFA can actually engage in advocacy around domestic violence. I think that remains in the realm and in the jurisdiction very much of the movements. Our job is to make sure that they don't see a resource crunch in undertaking that advocacy. And we are really, really committed to that. I mean, whether it is bringing the stories to the donors, whether it is making sure that there is resource available in whether you want to put in, respond to the situation digitally, make available more safe spaces, all of that, all the things that the movements are planning to bring resources to the table. I think, and I just want all of us to understand that this distinction between the role of women's funds and between that of the activist movements. There is, while we are your allies, your friends, people who are beneath your feet, as it were, but at the same time, we are women's funds. And it is your agenda that we support. And it is the feminist agenda that we fund, that we bring the resources to. Just for that clarity.
Thank you, Tulika. Theo and Teresa, would you like to address this question or are you good?
I'm fine. I'm happy to address something else later. Thanks.
No, go ahead. We have actually 6 minutes left. So, and we do have a few questions. So what I'm going to do, Teresa, you want to go ahead?
Yes, please. Hay mucha preocupación sobre la situación de emergencia en este momento para las mujeres por el contexto de COVID. Sin embargo, no tenemos que dejar de ver el horizonte. El impacto lo vamos a seguir sintiendo por un largo periodo. Entonces, desde los fondos tenemos ese reto de seguir trabajando con los distintos donantes y con la filantropía para seguir invirtiendo en el desarrollo y en la agenda de las mujeres, en los derechos y en la igualdad. Porque el impacto que nos viene muy fuerte en lo económico, en las oportunidades de desarrollo, en la sanación. ¿Cuánta gente en este momento está lastimada? No solo porque falleció o fue afectada por el COVID directamente, sino porque hay otras crisis económicas, sociales que se están dando alrededor. Nos tenemos que preparar también para hacer frente a esto. Y como dijo Tulika, nuestros fondos son un mecanismo para acompañar a los movimientos. No somos nosotras el movimiento, somos parte, contribuimos y me parece que ahí aprovecho para hacer un llamado a todos los aliados, aliadas, donantes, gobiernos, que podamos asumir esta transformación juntos. Creo que eso es importantísimo poder traerlo en acá. Me preguntan también sobre algo de la confianza entre movimientos. Esto es una muestra que es posible. Nos falta seguir trabajando y acompañando, pero no es una responsabilidad de los fondos la construcción de la confianza entre los movimientos. Podemos acompañar, sí, lo podemos hacer. Sin embargo, también respetamos el rol del activismo y de los movimientos. Gracias.
Thank you, Teresa. I think I'll just take the one last question, and that's for Hanke. And then I'll just come to all of you for your closing comments. And maybe Theo, then you can add over there what you wanted to. Is that all right? Okay. Hanke, so there are a couple of questions which I think you're the best person to respond to. One is, what is the future of LFS funding now that 4 years have ended? And the second question is, how is MFA thinking about expanding financing without geographical restrictions?
Okay, so thanks for these questions. Well, we are now in the process of starting and launching a second phase of Leading from the South, and we are actually in the process of assessing proposals from the 4 funds, and this is based on the results achieved and the unique position of these funds, but also to be able to continue building on the collaboration and the trust that has been established in the previous years, which is not something that just happens overnight, as has become clear already. So this is a continuation, actually, with some minor changes of Leading from the South for the next 5 years, and it will start, if everything goes well, the 1st of January 2021. The next question was about expanding, geographically. So yeah, we do have a geographic focus, but when it comes to Leading from the South, there is room to deviate from that, because of course gender inequality it is not limited to a few countries or a few regions. So it will be the same as is the case right now. Yeah, worldwide still.
Thank you, Hanke. We have 1 minute left, so maybe we can extend by a couple of minutes. But I would now like to hand over for your closing comments. There are still a lot of questions that we have left unanswered. I think a couple of them are very, very critical. So maybe if you can incorporate them in your closing comments, that would be great. And I think this question has come up a couple of times, is that we keep saying women's rights and women's movements, but how do we look at who are we excluding as women's movements as well? So what about the voices of LGBTIQ movements, and why do we only say women? So, and are we is our language captured within a very binary framework? So if you can also in your closing comments kind of address that issue of looking at feminist movements and inclusion and exclusion, that would be great. So over to you all, a minute each. Thank you. Who would like to start? I'm going to volunteer Tulika. Tulika, you're on mute.
Answers. I'm so sorry, I missed that. So you'll have to volunteer Theo. I volunteered Theo.
Okay, I'm being told. So I suppose the thing that I would want to say is that there are two things. I think it is a language issue, and that when we talk about feminist funding, that's a more inclusive way of approaching this. But at the end of the day, I want to be really clear. At AWDF, we talk about funding women and trans groups. We put it as lesbian and trans women are part of our agenda. And I know that as feminists, we sometimes have been, not just AWDF, but as feminists generally, we have been exclusionary of some of our sisters. And that is wrong. And we need to fix that and make it right. At AWDF, we look at the charter, the African Charter on feminist principles, and we work from that. However, we are also very clear that we are not funding men and boys. Some of the organizations that we support may have that as part of their agenda. That is their decision about how they tackle patriarchy and change. But as an African feminist fund established to get money to feminist organizations, we do limit how we fund. We do fund women-led, women-focused organizations, because the vast majority of money that flows through the philanthropic and aid systems goes to generic organizations that may say that they're women-focused, but are run by men and have more generic agendas. I do not apologize for saying that we are feminist funders. Until the day that we have equality in terms of the money that goes into our systems, the money that is given to the people most affected by the change that we want to see, until we have equality there, I am not going to apologize for funding to try and change the power relationships. Other people will fund other things. We do not have vast amounts of money. Let's focus on what we can do and to do it well. But let's really try to make sure that we are actively, inclusively diverse in the ways in which we go forward. And because this is the last thing that I'm going to be allowed to say, I do want to say again that I want to thank the other LFS funds for making this work. And people, it has not always been easy. We do have disagreements. We do have different ways of seeing things. But what's been great is that we are able to talk about it, because we know that we all have the same value system at heart, even if we have different ways of seeing things. And that's how we learn, and that's how we progress. And I'd also like to thank the ministry, because they really have walked alongside us, and they have been fantastic when we have come up with critique and said, this cannot work this way. Let's look together at how we change it. And so again, I think we've learned from them and they've learned from us. Is key. We have a long way to go, and to get there, we need the support of all of our feminist sisters, of all of the women's funds who are doing such amazing things. And we've mentioned Gaga, we've mentioned Count Me In. Women's funds are doing amazing work. Women's rights organizations are doing amazing work. Feminists are still fighting the fight. So let's do it together, because that makes it stronger.
Thank you, Theo. Who's going to follow that? Very quickly, I am just going to volunteer people. So, Teresa, you're next.
Okay. Hoy en el calendario maya es el día de agradecimiento. Y bueno, por supuesto, agradecer por la oportunidad, pero principalmente quiero hoy saludar todo el trabajo de las mujeres indígenas, las organizaciones, las mujeres feministas, de todas las expresiones que están en el día a día trabajando fuerte aún en medio de la pandemia no hemos parado, seguimos trabajando y quiero saludar todo ese trabajo desde lo local hasta el nivel internacional. Sin ese trabajo como de abejas que vamos construyendo juntas, no sería posible tampoco la existencia de nuestros fondos. Y por supuesto, valorar este acompañamiento que el Ministerio de Holanda nos hace a través de recursos, pero también, como lo decía Teo, a través de fortalecimiento de capacidades, de darnos sugerencias. Hemos crecido bastante y yo estoy muy feliz, contenta de que esta iniciativa, que hoy recuerdo cuando empezó hace 4 años, planificando, soñando juntas, creímos en nosotras mismas, en nuestros fondos, en nuestras instituciones, así que también quiero agradecer a Teo, Tulika, Luz, que no está con nosotras, la directora del Fondo de Mujeres del Sur, por supuesto a todos los equipos de cada una, porque ha sido posible trabajar juntas. Esto no se logra siempre en cuando son consorcios. Entonces, me parece que esta experiencia me gustaría seguir diciéndole a todas las que nos están viendo, escuchando, vale la pena trabajar juntas, en colectividad. Y a esto quisiera invitar. Somos capaces de transformar cuando vamos juntas con mayor fuerza. Y finalmente, también quisiera invitar a todas a seguir trabajando como agentes de cambio, porque insistimos mucho en que las políticas públicas y los presupuestos públicos tienen que ser transformados. No alcanzaremos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible si no se transforman las políticas públicas, y ahí hay una responsabilidad fuerte de los gobiernos de los distintos estados de transformar. No lo harán por propia voluntad. Seguiremos presionando hasta que esto se logre algún día. Y no olvidemos autocuidarnos, no olvidemos de la sanación, no olvidemos de nuestra conexión espiritual, sea cual sea nuestra fe. Esto no importa, lo que importa es esa conexión hacia el buen vivir, y con todo lo que nos acompaña, los recursos, la naturaleza. La pandemia nos está haciendo un llamado de atención, de manera no muy buena, pero tenemos que tomar la parte positiva. Gracias.
Thank you, Teresa. Laura? Closing comments.
Closing comments. Bueno, Anisha, comenzaste diciendo que reflexionáramos sobre este viaje, un journey, dijiste. Yo creo que realmente ha sido un viaje de crecimiento, con muchísimas dificultades, como dijo Teo, pero creo que hemos crecido juntas, y eso tiene un sabor y permite una fortaleza muy importante de los 4 fondos que formamos parte del consorcio. Y creo que en estos 4 años ha habido una base de aprendizaje tan importante que necesitamos seguir apoyándola, seguir creciendo y seguir consolidándola. Creo que estamos en estos 4 años, estamos, digamos, si se renueva, como dijo Hanke, que estamos en ese proceso, vamos a arrancar desde un lugar totalmente distinto desde hace 4 años, y creo que eso es muy importante y que redundará en beneficios importantísimo para nosotras y para las regiones donde estamos trabajando. Y nada, decirles que además son una fuente de inspiración enorme, que para mí es un lujazo estar cerca de ustedes, las panelistas que están trabajando, que están hoy aquí, así que muchísimas gracias por contar con sus palabras.
Thank you, Laura. Tulika.
Hanky.
So thank you. Sorry, can I speak?
Sure, Hanky, go ahead.
Okay. So just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful panel. And echoing Theo, we are also enthusiastic and proud of this program, and we believe in the Southern leadership that's inherent to it. It shows that donors have to dare to take risks sometimes. And we'll continue to play our own part in increasing the sustainability and impact of Leading from the South by engaging with a diverse group of potential new donors about the lessons learned and possibilities to collaborate through LFS. We shared our experiences with other mainly bilateral donors in multiple strategic conversations, and this has led to concrete new engagements between women's rights organizations and bilateral and philanthropic donors. With the current pandemic and the backlash against women's rights and continuing shrinking of civic space, many challenges lie ahead at the same time, but it also shows that the opportunity and the needs for investing in women and girls have never been greater. Women's organizations and movements around the world are on the front lines of change, holding the line, demanding equality and driving transformation. So we are really looking forward to continue working jointly on the human rights of women, girls, trans people to advocate for the full achievement of gender equality and other human rights in the global South. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Tulika, finally.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And I just want to kind of build on what my sister funds have said and what Hanke has said. And I also want to add to what Theo began by saying, that as feminist funds, let us remember why we were created. We didn't come out of the blue. We saw that funding for women's organizations was injustice was happening. It was unequal. It was discriminatory. It used the oldest possible gender stereotypes to deny women and deny the trans people, deny the gender non-conforming people, deny girls their rights, their voices, and their leadership. And that is why women's funds came into being. We have come from that experience and that pain of injustice of the women's movements and the rights movements that are led by feminist leadership. Yeah, so let us not forget why we are here. Do not ask us why we don't fund everybody. We're not here to fund everybody. We have looked at the landscape. We have seen the injustice. We are basing ourselves on, as they call it, hard evidence. There are numbers out there. Even now, we are looking at OECD number, 1% of funding goes to gender equality. Of that 1%, 0.039 goes to women and trans-led organizations. I mean, nothing goes to trans-led organizations, hardly anything. It's invisible, goes to women-led organizations. So let's not forget that number. That has not changed. And LFS, and I think as Count Me and as Gaga, we are all, as the Equality Fund, that's the fight that women's funds are fighting. That's what we are here for. So please remember, we're flowing the resources to you, but we exist for a reason, for a reason. And that is our role. And we will never be distracted from that. That is our commitment to you. And like Theo said, we just get it done together. Thank you.
So I'm going to take Theo's that line, collaboration is key. And I think that is something that has been one of the biggest learnings of Leading from the South. And we are very excited. We really hope that, we can continue on this journey together, better and stronger. And we need to do better. We need to listen more. We really need to look at how can we be better accountable to our movements as well. So thank you so much for all of you. Thank you so much all of you for joining. Thank you so much to the wonderful panelists. I want to give a big shout out to the communications team of the 4 funds, Lydia, Isa, Laura, Nikita, Pim. Where am I missing?
Today. Happy birthday, Pim.
I think everyone has been absolutely amazing in putting this together, overcoming language issues, overcoming time zones, taking calls at 12 o'clock at midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, because we do get things done. Feminists get things done. So on that note, I want to wish all of you good night, good day, wherever you are. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Anisha, for your work. You have been wonderful.
Great job. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you, Hanke.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.